Thank you. I hope you can all hear me. Ah. How to begin? We've had such a number of weeks of amazing talks, connection, deep caring, and my heart really feels it all. And I feel such immense gratitude for the fact that I'm here, the fact that I'm here with all of you, that I belong to this community, this Sangha. So much gratitude for all of the teachers that have been before us, the teachers that are still here, and the teachers that may not be as easy to name, but are part of our everyday life. I just wanted to borrow a little bit of what Mary said at the end of one of her newsletters. And she said, to all of those whose steady work and dedication and commitment made the retreat, but it also makes everything happen in this Sangha. Constant work, constant support, the gift of giving to each other on a constant basis. And to all of you for just being here, and my heartfelt appreciation for that, for the fact that you're here. And I'm beginning with gratitude, and I think we often begin with gratitude, and it runs all the way through. For me, it runs all the way through the gratefulness for just being alive. And just before I came online, there were some words that were kind of singing in my head a little bit. So I'm just going to read them because they were there, and I'll offer them to you. We don't know how we're formed, and we don't know why we're here, if there is a why. And we have no idea what we bring to this world. And we don't know when our particular boat is going to sink. We only know that we are here, rowing, sailing, no destination, and that we're all here, all of us, with all of this, everything, with this aliveness, with this togetherness right now. And this brings me very much to what Trudy shared with us last week, her beautiful talk, of how vital our connection with each other is. Warm hand to warm heart. And we'd better hold hands. And I feel deeply grateful again for that opportunity to be able to hold hands with all of you. And I was thinking about the retreat, and I was thinking about, so many things that have been moving through me over the last few weeks, still percolating, and whether they'll make any sort of sense is not really what's relevant. It's more about allowing things to percolate and be here and just seeing what arises and offering this person sitting here right now. I've always loved the book, Grace Unfolding. which is one of the early Hakomi books that Ron Kurtz wrote with a fellow writer, Greg Johansson. And there are many quotes in that from the Tao Ching. And he says, "How do I know about the world?" is one of the little quotes. How do I know about the world? By what is in me. So that's all really that I can bring, is what's in me. And what's been in me at the moment is very much about the retreat, was about ceremony as embodiment of vow. And I've been asking myself, well, what does it mean to live by vow in this world now for me? And Norman Fisher says that vows are energies, vows are aspirations, they're larger than life, endless sources of inspiration, they're different from goals. We think we can meet goals, don't we? Well, I'm not sure about that for myself, but vows can be practiced, but they're never exactly completed because essentially they're unfulfillable. And it's their very inexhaustibility that propels us forward, opens us up, shapes our desire and actions. So we're on a path to nowhere. But the key thing is being on that path. And on retreat, there were several things that kind of stayed with me. And again, I wanted to share those with you. One of the key things for me, and it was quite major and surprised me, you know, which is kind of good, you know, when something surprises you, it's like, oh, that's just happened. How do I meet that? And the surprise for me was how big the boulder was that dropped in the water of my consciousness and awareness when I saw Trudy and Josh sitting together at the front of the retreat. Trudy as an entrusted teacher sitting with Josh. And for me, it was enormous and is enormous to see a woman sitting there. And for me, it's meant a huge, huge amount, huge. And I still don't know the fullness of it all. But it feels as if there's a wholeness in the Sangha that is being met by having a woman and a man sitting at the front in a tradition that has been predominantly male. And I know, you know, that the forms that we have are just forms of life and that we call them male and female. But my experience is being a female in this world. So that's really been sitting with me, and it felt important and it feels important still to look at how, if we are living by vow, for me it's been important to look at how women live by vow. And please forgive me if that's kind of the concentration of the talk is women's voices, but it is. Mine being one of them. And I wanted to share with you something might make me cry. I've got some tissues close by just in case. One of the things that we did when we were on retreat was we had what's called a living memorial service. And for those of you who weren't there, this was almost as if we were offering ourselves onto the altar. And we each stood up singly, and we said our name and our date of birth and a place where we were born and a person who preceded us in death. And then we all had a service together. And we chanted in Japanese, would you believe? I'm not sure how well, but we did. And I found myself questioning all sorts of things. I began to think about something happened about thinking about my own birth date. I was born on the 26th of July, 1945. And it suddenly struck me as I was going through all of these ceremonies on retreat and receiving my rakasu with my name on in Japanese, that I was born 10 days before Hiroshima and Nagasaki and the atomic bomb. And that really resonated for me. But here I am now, involved in a practice that has come principally from Japanese Buddhism, Zen Buddhism. And that really moved me to think about that being part of my own life. That's when I was born. I was only tiny. And then for a long time, my mother died in 2010. And so for 13 years, I've had a case full of the letters that my parents wrote to each other during the war. And in that case, there's an envelope, and in that envelope, my mum had carefully put the letters that were to do with around my birth. I hadn't looked at them until this last week. You can see why this would make me emotional. And there were two, here they are. They're only tiny, I don't know whether you can see them. One from my father, one from my mother. And I wanted to see what happened for them when the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and what influence that had on them. Of course, these letters have made me cry. There's so much love in them and innocence in many ways, and delight that they've got a little girl. And there was no question that I was born from a place of love. But when I came to look at the words to see if I could find anything about the atomic bomb, these two were written on the 7th of August. So that's the day after. And I'm going to share a little bit with you, just what they said. I'm going to take them out because it feels important to read directly from them. This is from my mother, my father, and just at the end of the letter, where she's been telling him all about her daily activities, having cocoa, etc. And this is what she says. Isn't this atomic bomb amazing? I've been reading an article explaining it, trying to understand it. It may mean the end of the Japanese side quite soon. What do you think? That's it. And my father replies, they wrote to each other every day. This new atomic bomb has put rather a different complexion on the Japanese war and may mean an early surrender. And there might be general mobilization much nearer. It sounds a very frightful and devastating thing. And one can only be thankful that we have discovered it first. Otherwise, it would have been heaven help us too. That's all he says. I think the thing that these letters brought home to me, and this, I suppose, personal revelation, if you like, I don't know how else to put it, was that the pain, destruction, devastation in our human world, in our human lives, has been there since humanity began, I think. And I kind of hear in their letters these innocent voices, not truly recognizing, as if I could truly recognize the horror of atomic bomb, or recognizing what it might mean for humanity. And then I think of what's happening now in the world and how we have been meeting all of that in some way in our Sangha talks, and how to be with our own pain and our own helplessness and deep sense of grief and loss, whatever way you want to name it. So it felt important for me to think about the voices that have been in some way meeting this. And the first person that I thought about was Joanna Macy. And many of you will know of Joanna Macy. Probably know more than I do. But if I just say a tiny little bit, that she's an author, a teacher, a scholar of Buddhism, deeply into ecology, systems thinking, justice, and she has been an activist for 6 decades. Can you imagine that? 6 decades. And the key thing that I wanted to talk about was her talk, her work, which is called The Work That Reconnects. And she runs and has run for many years. I mean, she's in 90 something now, I think. She's run for many years workshops for people, meeting devastation, the horror of humanity, the depth of our struggle and pain. And there are four elements, usually four elements to these workshops, like a spiral. And I just wanted to offer those this evening, because partly for myself, well, very much for myself, meeting the sense that I was born just before the atomic bomb, and the impact of all of those things. And my letters, the letters from my parents, you know, they're full of hope, of course, because they see the end of the war coming and they have another small child. But what Joanna Macy does is she asks us, first of all, to think with gratitude. So I began this talk with gratitude. And we have so much to be grateful for our own aliveness, for the shelter that we have, for the world in which we're living just at the moment. For the trees, for the birds, for everything, for the sky, for the earth. So much to be grateful for. And then she asks us to turn to our pain. So I'm going to invite you to do that for a moment. And before we began this talk, I asked Trudy if she would put a bowl on the altar. And one of the key things that Joanna Macy suggests is that we really honor our pain. We're not trying to get rid of it, that won't work. We're not trying to change it into something else. We're just honoring it. So I'm going to invite you just for a couple of minutes, just to sit, perhaps with your hands on your heart. And allow yourself to feel. That's if it's okay. Not to a place of overwhelm, but just to stay with what's there at the moment. The pain of being in this world, as it is now, of seeing all the images that we see, of knowing the things that are happening in Israel and Gaza and Ukraine and all over the world, where there is war and devastation and loss of life. And I'm just going to be silent for a minute or two. I'll time us. So I'll just make this ding. I haven't got my bell. I could have asked Maria. And I want you to imagine that in your hands, you have all of those feelings, the pain, the anger, whatever is there with what's happening in the world and what it is doing to you right now. And you can see on the altar, if you can see the altar at the front of the altar, I think it's the little blue bow that Trudy has placed there. And I want you to imagine that you can place all of that on the altar and honor it as being part of who you are and part of your humanity, your belonging to this human race. And I'm going to place mine. And I wonder if Maria, if we bow, would you ring a bell for us?
Yes.
Thank you. So then, having honored our own pain, our own distress, our own part in it all, if we were born just before Hiroshima and Nagasaki, you were there, weren't you? I was there. So then how do we see things with fresh eyes? Having turned towards it, how do we begin to see things a little differently? And I wanted to just read for you, if I can find it. Something from a book that I've had for a little while, which I don't know if any of you know of. It's called The Bond Between Women, A Journey to Fierce Compassion, and it's by somebody called China Galland. And in this book, she has various meetings with many women all over the world. But the one that I was particularly struck by and have looked for, because it felt important for me to meet the voice of somebody who has lived through conflict and managed somehow to maintain a Buddhist perspective. And this particular person is called Sister Chan Kong, and you may have heard of her. She is a Buddhist nun who lived in Vietnam and is still alive, and she helped Thich Nhat Hanh to set up the Plum Village community in France. And she lived all the way through the Vietnamese War. And she saw many horrors and lived with many, many terrible, terrible things. Her friends being killed. Things that we would think are unbearable. And they are unbearable. But the thing that I was wondered about was, how did she keep her faith in humanity, really? So there's a couple of bits that I would like to just read. She began looking after the poor in Vietnam when she was 14. What a woman. She talks about how she meets things. And she talks about one particular incident where she has to give a eulogy for some friends who've been shot. And she wants somehow, finds a way somehow of finding something slightly positive, in that the people who shot them said that they didn't want to do it. So she meets it with that. And then she says, How do we give something to the future? She didn't love these people, but she says, I thought it was necessary to go in the direction of beauty and goodness. Because what will we give to the future generation if they are already bombed? There is already violence. There is already hate. There is already ignorance everywhere. If the only thing we can say is, I hate you, what is the use? Our enemies are ignorance. Our enemies are hatred. Our enemies are fame, jealousy, misunderstanding. Our enemies are not humans. If we kill other people, with whom shall we live? And then just one more little extract. When you're angry, you get carried away by your anger. In this training, we have to stop thinking, stop acting, and go back to our breath to restore the clearness of our mind before making any big decisions. Take no action. So I released the tension and tried only to dwell in the present moment. And at that moment, I saw a little flower make her way through the ruin of all the bombing. There was a little flower still blooming in the midst of the ruin, and I was truly moved. I could see, oh, little flower, you have done your best. Why not me? So I tried to look deeper, and I looked around, and I saw so many people who suffered, who cried, who shouted. But there were the other people as well, the humble people, the ones who silently tried to help the wounded, to bring rice for the sick, for the war victims who had nothing to eat. There were quite a few angels around in the midst of that room, hatred and anger. Many bodhisattvas, including that little flower. I had to do my best to go in the direction of beauty. I saw that life is not only cruelty and confusion and ignorance, but that life has many heartful people, wonderful people, who are trying to do their best. You don't need to see 10,000 flowers in order to see that there's so much beauty in life that is waving to you and saying hello. We try to live in beauty, in that light, and in that goodness. And she sang. And she sang when she was burying people's bodies. And she sang in order to keep that spirit turning towards what was good and wholesome. So how do we move? How do we keep the spell? How do we live together? It feels so important that there's all of us, every nationality, every gender, every race. And I just wanted to finish with another little quote from The Circle of the Way, which I think for me kind of puts in perspective that sense of being a woman in the world and the importance of every voice being heard. And this is from The Circle of the Way by Barbara O'Brien, which is the history of Zen from Buddha to the modern world. And just right at the end, he says, It seems to me that the single most revolutionary development of Western Zen is that women and men are practicing together as equals. That's never happened before. And this has been true in the West only recently. Women who went into practice in the West, even in the late 20th century, often found themselves up against the usual wall of patriarchy. But in recent years, I have seen many North American sanghas encourage the practice and leadership of women. Aren't we lucky? Doesn't say that here, that's me. At the same time, sanghas have worked to be more welcoming to people of colour and LGBTQ students. I make no predictions of how all this might shape the future of Zen, but it could prove to be remarkable. So here we are in a time and in a sangha that things could prove to be remarkable. Thank you very much.